take great songs that people love and connect with, it's, you know, it's really difficult to mess it up. You know, you just got to do a reasonably good performance of those songs, and you can, you know, people are going to relate to it. You know. You never should have promised me to give it here. Don't hold back, give it here. Don't say nothing, just give it here. Come on, give it here. Come on, give it here. Come on, give it here. Come on.
Soul Deep has gone on to sell more than 600,000 copies. But despite Jimmy's huge fame and success, the mid-90s saw the Barnes family in financial difficulty.
After Soul Deep, you know, like, there was that whole, you know, period was very heady. We, you know, obviously, you know, prior to Soul Deep, I'd just spent millions and millions of dollars rebuilding this house from the ground up, basically. And it was right at the point where the Labour government was in, and there was a huge, you know, interest rates went through the roof, and you know, and I spent everything on everybody, and you know, I had like 10 cars, which I drove the same one, only drove the same one every day, and everybody else drove my Ferraris, and all those people just borrowed them, you know, so it was just ridiculous, and you know, eventually that sort of, you know, caught up, and suddenly I realized I was completely battling to keep my head above water. And at one point I realized I was touring just to pay, you know, tax and just to pay bills. And it was really getting me down, and I thought, you know, I had such a mortgage and all, I don't know how it all happened, and overwhelmed me. And I thought, well, the only way I can get out of this is to, you know, to pay all these off. I've got to sell my house. And that was for me was a really tough thing, because the house I had in Barrel was the first home that I ever owned. None of my family owned a home, and you know, we were battlers, and my kids were, you know, brought up there, and it was really, you know, this was my sort of grounding, my one secure thing, and but I thought to myself, well, I'm going to have to sell it, and I stalled for as long as I could, and I really fought trying to keep my head above water, but finally I just sold it and paid all the bills and stuff, and sort of, you know, paid the tax man, and it was a funny thing, you know. I thought that'd be the end of me. I thought I was going to die. But from the minute I sold it, and it was like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I thought, well, that's it. I paid my bills. I've paid everything off. I'm back where I started. I'm okay. You know, what have I got left? I've got, you know, my family, and I can sing. And it was a great feeling suddenly to realize that the only things I needed, I had. The only things I really needed, nobody could ever take from me. So I said to my wife, I said to Jane, let's move. You know, let's go overseas for a couple of years. So we moved to Aix-en-Provence.
I think it was a really good thing for the family too, and it meant that we got to go. He had some privacy for the first time in, you know, my whole life. He'd be able to walk down the street and not get asked things all the time, be able to go to dinner and not be stopped in the middle of eating, or go to a movie and not get talked to in the movies. But, you know, while we're there, you know, of course, you know, then the press get onto it and think that, they think I've sold my house. They think there's all this stuff about me being a tax exile, and, you know, it was just crap, you know. I paid everybody off before I left.
Really the pinnacle of it all was when the Channel 7 news crew was outside the house in France and was splat all over the television, and I remember Jimmy ringing me. And this was so Jimmy rings me up and he says, look, this television crew, you know, outside my house, they're hassling me, I want them to fuck off, you know, what should I do? I said, well, you know what you should do? You should go make a cup of tea and sit down in the kitchen and just don't go outside, whatever you do, and just leave it alone. So within 5 minutes, I've got Jane Barnes on the phone screaming and yelling, Jimmy's outside fighting with the television crew. And
Michael's a great mate, you know. Michael, you know, put us up in a house in France for 2 years and just looked after us, and you know, and allowed me to keep creating. And you know, it was when things got really tough, I really found out who my best mates were, you know. And Michael stood up and was kind of number one, you know. He was an incredible bloke. So, you know, consequently, him and I are sort of inseparable. You know, I don't care, you know, whatever happens. I think him and I will always keep working together.
His return from France saw Jimmy release the critically acclaimed Cyclone. Soon after, he was once again at the top of the charts with his greatest hits anthology. '99 saw the release of the angst-ridden Love and Fear.
Talk about fear, talk about pain.
A string of personal albums followed, but the next big milestone in Jimmy's life would be facing up to his abuse of drugs and alcohol.
He'd probably be the first to admit I don't think he was doing a gig sober in those days.
When he was pretty bad, I was breaking into his hotel rooms.
Barnesy, you don't look well, mate.
His incredible voice, and for drinking 2 bottles of vodka a day.
You have to understand, he clearly does not have the same sort of bunch of molecules as everybody else.
He'd probably be the first to admit I don't think he was doing a gig sober in those days.
You know, over 30 years or whatever it was, I reckon I'd probably done half a dozen shows straight and sober. You know, I even smuggled booze into and drugs into bloody, you know, playing, you know, Pentridge B Division, you know, Long Bay Jail, you name it, you know, anywhere. I'd you know, find a way of I'd get drunk before I played.
I'll never forget when Jim offered to do vocals on my 12th man recording called Marvellous. Jim said, yeah, I'll do some, want to do some beefies, do some backing vocals. And then I've got this mental picture of pulling into that driveway of his house in this thick pea soup of fog, and there's Jim standing there with this cardboard box with 4 bottles of vodka in it. 4 bottles of vodka at 2:30 in the morning to do some backing vocals on my stupid novelty song. M-A-R-V-E-L-L-O-U-S. And at one stage Jim did, I said, I think we wouldn't mind a couple of screams in there, Jim, you know, because I was going to have Richie Benno react to the scream. Hey, keep it down there, Curly. And so Jim does a scream, and he nearly fucking knocked himself out.
Take it easy, buddy. Take it easy.
My headache came. You know the ones where I sort of used to kill people and things? Be careful.
He went very lightheaded for a second and had to grab hold of the wall.
When he was going through the height of his addiction, probably when I was it's probably around 14 through to the end of school, basically. So that was, you know, that was a hard time for the family generally, but I mean, we've always been a very strong unit, so it wasn't like it was like, oh, are we going to make it through or not? It was like, well, one, was he going to stay alive, because he was pretty out of control with the drugs and with the drinking. But for me, like we've always got along really, really well, so there's never been like a struggle with us. But that was probably the hardest time with him, I guess, when he was just more out of worry for him that he was hurting himself. I've been touring with him since I was 16, so when he was pretty bad, I was breaking into his hotel rooms to check that he was alive.
You know, he was pretty wild, but at the same time, I'd never kind of seen him lose any control. And to this day, he's still as passionate about performing live. It's probably the one thing he would never want to see fall away. You know, he's always... I can't imagine, you know, until he'd been ill recently, that he'd cancelled many gigs in his entire career, and nor would he ever